Joining us now in the Hyundai Texans radio studio, it's Executive Vice President and General Manager Nick Caserio. How's it going, Nick?
Fellas, good to be here.
Happy Thanksgiving week. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. I'm sure that might come up later on in the conversation today, but let's talk about the latest victory over the Cardinals in advance of what's going to happen on Sunday with a huge game with the Jaguars. Team is on a nice little roll right here, Nick.
Yeah, in the end, it's all about getting wins in this league. So it's about figuring out a way each week. You hopefully do enough, and that's all that really matters in the end. So I think that game was a good example. Did some good things offensively in the first half, kind of stalled a little bit in the second half, but defensively really finished the game strong. 3 or 4 possessions there, 4th down stops, which essentially are like turnovers. So made some timely plays, received a lot of contributions from a lot of different players. It's really kind of survive in advance and then move on to the next week. So a lot that we can learn from in that game, a lot of things that we can certainly improve and clean up, but that's what this league is this time of year.
Nick, you signed Blake Cashman, and we talked about this a little bit a couple years ago. What you're getting now out of him, 19 tackles, a sack, couple TFLs, had the coach comp system in his ears. I mean, is this even beyond your expectation when you signed him a couple years ago, what he's brought to this team?
Yeah, Blake's really a good example of a player who's kind of taking advantage of his opportunities. So whenever he's had a role defensively, the more you kind of give him, the more productive he's been at different points. And he's been a good player in the kicking game over the course of his career. So I think the idea was when we acquired him, he definitely would have a role in the kicking game, but also had defensive value. So we've talked about this. You have some players that kind of are special teams only. You have some players that are sort of combo, either offensively, defensively, plus the kicking game. I think what's happened is just the way that he's played and just some of the things that have happened in that position, it's kind of flipped where it's become a little bit more defensive-centric and sort of then you take some snaps off of him in the kicking game because otherwise you just tax the player. But, Blake's an instinctive player, runs well, he's tough, being able to handle the communication, the green dot. I'd say some players can handle that role or responsibility. Other players like to receive the information from somebody else. But worked really hard during the course of the week with Coach Kiff and D'Amico and Matt, and then went in the game and kind of handled that responsibility, which is something that he's certainly proven that he's capable of handling.
It's so interesting, Nick, because it's all a big puzzle on Sundays. Who can fit, who's available, who's not, and there you are with the 2 linebackers you had and the extra Corey Littleton coming off the sideline. And in earlier games this season, you might not have Blake. You might not have another player who would be available on Sunday. They're all fitting together very well. Can you speak to that a little bit and the kind of personalities you look for who can fit into that mix?
Yeah, no, it's a great. It's kind of like a puzzle, and this is where we've talked about. We just try to, the best we can, build up as comprehensive a depth on our team as much as possible. And you're going to have X number of players on the roster at certain positions. Then you're going to have your depth off the roster as well, and there might be a point in time where you're going to have to utilize those players. Say Steven Sims, kind of an example of that. Really hadn't done much during the course of the year. He's been on the practice squad. He's worked really hard. He's had good weeks of practice, and then he had an opportunity, and we were able to use him and get some plays out of him. So you kind of have a group of players who what their role is going to be when they're at the game, and if you have to make some adjustments and modifications based on your circumstances, then you have to be able to sort of bob and weave a little bit. And those are discussions that take place early in the week so you can start to plan. Matter of fact, after the game, D'Amico and I were talking, Monday about, all right, how do we see this week? What are some of the things that we have to do? And also in anticipation of maybe some of the things that are going to happen even after the Jacksonville game. So you're trying to deal with the week, who's going to be active, who's available. The injured players that are out, you kind of limit them, move them off to the side, figure out your pool of players that's available. We know we're going to have to make 6 or 7 players inactive. And then how do we get, the best 47 or 48 players to the game? That's the goal.
One of the guys that came to the game after being hurt for a while, just a second game back, is Derrick Stingley Jr. Nick, what did you see from Derrick? Obviously, the interception was great, but he had a play on a dig. He made a play on 4th down. What are you seeing from Derrick in the 2 games he's been back?
Yeah, I think he's getting more comfortable and confident with being on the field. Anytime you miss an extended period of time, it's always tough. So you go through practice, that's sort of one phase. Then you get to the game, that's another phase. Cincinnati week, we kind of were 3 for 2 there at corner with Stevens, Shaq, and Sting. And in this game, he had a few more snaps, played a little bit more extensively. So anytime a player is just able to get on the field, a little more comfortable, get more experience, your confidence grows, and we can make some plays on top of that. So, Derrick's worked really hard. He's got a good attitude. He's handled everything that's kind of come his way. So now the goal is to try to build on the positives and correct some of the things that, we need to get fixed.
Building on what we talked about last week with the running game, it seems like it's just more consistent now. The line is more consistent as far as the lineup of the 5 guys you have in front of the running back, and Devin Singletary is performing well for you.
Yeah, the running game is all about just the distribution of blockers, getting kind of hat on a hat and getting the defensive players covered up, make sure you account for them. We had some runs in a game where that was certainly the case, and there's some other runs, there's some 0 or negative runs where maybe we went to the wrong guy or there was an unblocked player. So as long as you can mitigate that and limit that, then it's up to the back to kind of find a space, understand the integrity of the play, and then just be decisive with the ball. But Motor's done a nice job here, the past few weeks. So, Motor's been a productive player over the course of his career. When you look at his history in Buffalo, I mean, he gained yards. I mean, that's what he's done over the course of his career. So, the running game is about really everybody. The receivers are a part of it. The tight ends are a part of it. Obviously, the offensive line is a part of it. The back's part of it. So, I'd say it's certainly a different set of circumstances, a big challenge this week. We'll talk about Jacksonville, but they're one of the better run defenses in the league. So, what we did over the last couple of weeks, there may be some carryover, there might not be, but, there can be some different things that we're going to deal with the Jaguars.
Nick, Tankel, I think it's been interesting to watch kind of the evolution of Tank, obviously, since he's been here. But there was always thought, I think, just solely because of his size, he's a slot receiver. He's got to be a slot receiver. And I think from the day he set foot in this building, I don't think there was any thought of, he's got to be pigeonholed into one spot. And he's really become a perimeter threat, whether he's inside, whether he's outside, whether it's the backfield or wherever he is. When did you kind of realize, okay, Tank is a guy that can give us – he's not a slot receiver. He's more than just that. When did you kind of have that realization?
Yeah, John, it's an interesting discussion. I think there's sort of a misnomer where if a player is a certain size or stature or height, then he automatically gets pigeonholed into a particular spot. I think you have to look at each individual player and the skills that they bring to the table. Had a lot of experience. We've had a lot of experience on a player like Wes, who I would say is considered a smaller player, but his toughness, his awareness, his sense of space, he had a good feel for the inside part of the field. Troy Brown was the same way. And I would say, a guy like Tank is fast, he's explosive, he has quickness, and he can win on the perimeter. So the things that Tank does well, at times they're more suited for perimeter, and then the things that go on in the inside part of the field are a little bit different. So you have to, it's case by case, but you can't just pigeonhole a player because he's this size. I mean, I think going back, even a guy like Deshaun Jackson, who maybe is considered a quote unquote smaller player, but Deshaun was an electric player. He was fast. He made a lot of big explosive plays down the field. So the game is played differently inside than it is outside. There might be some times where you put a player inside the formation specifically to ask him to do something. I'd say in Tank's case, probably the thing that stands out about him is just his competitiveness and his toughness, because he's not afraid to go in there and mix it up in a run game and try to dig out the force.
All right, Nick, you have one of the top offenses in the league, and you have a rookie quarterback doing it, and he had another big game yardage-wise and had the touchdowns. He had the turnovers as well, and how he reacted after the game was pretty interesting. He said, I got to keep doing my thing, obviously, but he knows he's got to stop turning the ball over. So your thoughts on that moving forward as you navigate through these next few games?
Yeah, I'd say CJ probably articulated that very well. I mean, it's really about one play in each game, so you can't let what happened a previous play affect sort of what goes on moving forward. So try to understand what happened, understand the why behind it, and then keep moving forward. I mean, this game is about confidence and it's believing in yourself, believing in your ability, believing in your teammates. So understand what happened, try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. There's nothing more important than ball security, I'd say, as an overall offense. We emphasize that. We emphasize taking the ball away on defense. I'd say specifically this week, you're talking about a Jacksonville team that leads the league in takeaways with 20. So ball security is at a premium. So you just have to keep playing football. There's going to be some things that go your way, some good plays, and there's going to be some bad plays. I mean, 65, 70 plays on each side of the ball in each game. Not all of them are going to be perfect. Can't lose your confidence, can't lose your faith. Just understand just what happened on the play and then just move on to the next situation.
Nick, it's going to sound like a strange question in some sense as I ask it, but I'll try and explain. How much value is there in winning these games as opposed to we're playing them close and we're playing them hard, but we're winning? How much is that giving confidence to the guys? How much is that giving them belief that, hey, no matter what happens, we can still pull this thing out in the end? I think about when early in your Patriots career, you're coming off, 5-11 in 2000, and all of a sudden in 2001, you start winning those games, and you start getting to a point where that's snowballing, and you're winning late. and that took you all the way through the playoffs. Not saying that this team is that team, but when you saw it with that team building the confidence, do you see kind of the same thing here, that confidence is building with each and every win? Not just we played well, but that we're winning the game?
Yeah, I think it's a mindset and mentality. And then when you actually are able to see kind of the fruits of your labor come to fruition and with a win, in the end, this league is about winning.
Yeah.
So it's about finding a way. And I think when you have just collective belief in the locker room, because ultimately it's about the players. So there's only so much that we can do, but it's up to the players to take ownership of the situation and to know if we do the right things along the way, we're going to put ourselves in a position and then get to the fourth quarter and then make enough plays to finish off the football game. So when you start to do that, then you create, I'd say, more belief, and you see there's examples of, all right, if we do the right things, then the result is the result that, we all want. And you see that around the league. I mean, we're going to talk about Denver next week, but there's another good example. The team, they were 1-5, and everybody wrote them off. And I'd say now they're probably one of the more dangerous teams in the league. So, say winning solves a lot of problems sometimes, but you just have to make sure you're doing the right things during the course of the week, that you put yourself in a position to give yourself an opportunity to go out there and execute when it matters.
Well, one of the things you do in the course of the week is sign players, Nick, and we've talked about this from time to time. It's never really goodbye with a player. Sometimes it's hello again, and Desmond King enters the building. So discuss that a little bit. We just saw DeAndre Houston-Carson a few weeks ago come back, and he's paying dividends for you. Des King knows his way around the building for sure, and this team.
Yeah, you never really know when you're going to need players. And I think we've always, D'Amico and I, have kind of tried to handle things as professionally as possible and just be honest with the player. And sometimes you make a decision in the short term, but you don't close the door, you leave it open because there might be an opportunity further down the road. So, release Des in training camp. We didn't think that Des could help us. It's just we had so many other players and other spots and role identification. We just went a different direction. And, Des ended up there in 4 or 5 weeks with Pittsburgh. Really played in the return game. They didn't use him much on defense, and he's kind of been out here for a little bit. But, Des is a good football player, familiar with how we do things, both defensively and in the kicking game. So he's on the practice squad. We'll kind of see how it goes, day to day. And then at some point, there's probably a good chance that, he's going to be on the field. I think we've had some injuries in the secondary. So, talk about a player that has experience. It's played multiple spots. He's played inside the formation. He's played in the perimeter formation. He's handled balls as a punt returner and kickoff returner. So, say this time of year, to be able to find a player like Des or just bring him in the building, hopefully gives us a little bit of flexibility here with the whole roster.
All right, Nick, it's the first time this year that we'll do it. We're playing a division team for the second time, it being the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we did our scouting report back in week 3, but from week 3 to week 12, we worked week 12, 9 weeks over that time. What have you seen different from Jacksonville from the time that we beat him in Duval County to what we'll see on Sunday?
Yeah, some things have started to clear a little bit, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Defensively, their run defense is one of the top run defense in the league, so they put a lot of stress on you, and they've done a really good job of taking the ball away. I'd say the two players that have really stood out amongst the larger group on defense, I'd say Josh Allen's really probably having one of his best years. His tenacity and the way he finishes plays, it's really a credit to him, but he's tough, he's explosive, plays with good leverage, plays with good strength on the edge. He presents a lot of problems, and he gave us some problems even in the first game as well. And Olakon is either, top 2 or 3 tacklers in the league. So he creates a lot of negative plays for their defense. Very instinctive player, around the ball a lot. If you want to have success running the football, you're going to have to find a way to get ahead on him. But, those two players amongst a larger group have done a really good job. So they've taken the ball away. They've played good run defense, and they've played good in the red area. I think they're top 10 in red area defense. So that's one of the reasons that they're, playing well and they have the record that they have. And then offensively, they've kind of always been a little bit of a 3-4 open team, 11 personnel. Ridley, I'd say he's had a good year. Accentuated that with I think he had 5 or 6 catches for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against Tennessee. But he presents some problems, and then Kirk has been a really, I'd say, consistently productive player. Trevor's playing well. He's not turning the ball over. He's making good decisions, and they've gotten good production from their backs. ETN, we've talked about him previously. He gets about 20, 25 touches in a game, and typically when he gets those touches, that correlates to winning. And if he doesn't get enough touches, then they haven't won those games. So they put a lot of stress with their skill players, and then they've made a couple changes just on the offensive line. Robinson's back, which he didn't play in the first game. They made a change of left guard. So they've kind of made some subtle modifications relative to what we saw. I think the big thing that's a little bit different is in a return game with Agnew going on injured reserve. So you're talking about one of the most explosive players they have on a team, but they're going to use Parker Washington, who's a good young player. So I think the core of what they do has remained the same. They've kind of made some modifications, and then their team is sort of declared, and they're 7-3. I mean, for good reason. So it'll certainly be a big challenge in front of us.
They're like the Texans in that they don't seem to have a number one receiver, really. The tight end has more catches than anybody, and they kind of spread the ball around. Do we make too big a deal about number one receiver sometimes?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is just look at the skill players as a group and how you utilize those players. It goes both ways. If you just have kind of that one person, well, then the defense kind of knows how to handle that. When you have a diversity of options, maybe that causes the defense play a little bit differently. But I would say specific to Jacksonville, you have to account for their receivers. You got to account for Kirk, you got to account for Ridley, and you have to account for Ingram. And Ingram's really a receiver. I know he's listed as a tight end, but he's, to your point, I mean, he has as many targets as any receiver. So when you just have that much, I would say, diversity throughout, it gives the offense a little bit more flexibility. So, I mean, I think that's a narrative people like to talk about kind of outside the building, but, it's really about the entire skill group and how you utilize and, where they line up.
Nick Etienne, we talked about a little bit, but it feels like he's almost getting better each and every game as it goes through, and you wouldn't think that. It's like, boy, you'd think a running back would take some shots and they'd start to kind of wither a little bit. It feels like he gets stronger not only during a game, but in the season he's getting better as well.
Yeah, and he's an elusive player, doesn't really take a lot of big hits, so he's very diverse. I mean, he's a three-down back, so he plays, 75, 80% of the snaps, which not all running backs are on the field in all situations. So they kind of spell him with the Ernest Johnson a little bit, but he's a good player. He was a good player at Clemson, and he's been a good player. I mean, his first season just got, he lost his first season because he got hurt in training camp, but since he's been healthy, since he's been available, he's certainly been a big part of their offense.
I wanted to ask you about players getting fined, and nothing specific about this, but it's definitely out there, and we see it every week. All these guys around the league getting fined, and very often the flag is not thrown in the course of the game, so it's after the fact policing of the game. And is this a relatively new development? What are they trying to get accomplished here, Nick? What can you share with us
I think
about
the big
that?
thing is just the emphasis on player safety. So let's say each player is different. Each situation is different. There's some plays, like you mentioned, that they're not flagged in a game, and then there's follow-up, and then they're fined as a result. So all we can do is, as a team, is just coach the right techniques, coach the proper techniques, make sure the players understand the rationale and the reasoning, why. I'd say we don't always necessarily agree with the league, but in the end, it's sort of out of our hands. There's a governing body that handles it. So all we can do is educate the players, make sure they have an understanding. I mean, I don't want to speak for the league, but I mean, I think candidly, some players may be a little bit targeted more than others unfairly. But I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. All we can do is just kind of manage the situation, handle the situation, make sure the player understands the rationale why, and just try to coach with the right technique.
Nick, now that the college football season is winding down, we got a final this week, then you got championship weekend. What's kind of the role for your scouts? What will they be doing? Do they go to bowl games? Do you like to see the bowl games, even though a lot of guys may not play? How do you kind of handle that situation at the end of the year?
We're winding down here. There's another, call it, week or two left. You kind of have some of the regular season play this week, and then next week you'll have some of the conference championship games, and then you'll start the bowl games 2 or 3 weeks, after that. The big thing, let's start with the bowl games. If a player maybe hasn't played or you haven't seen them, maybe you get a live look. Otherwise, you're not going to put more emphasis on the bowl game. But the bulk of the work is done kind of the fall process. So we'll have our group in probably in a couple weeks and start the first initial round of discussions. And then we'll kind of have a middle of December until kind of February 1st, where there's a lot of things that'll happen between the bowl games, and then you'll get the postseason all-star games. Senior Bowl, you get another exposure. I think the one thing that's a little bit different, with the Senior Bowl is just the postseason bowl games is just allowing underclassmen to participate,
Yeah.
which just gives more players an opportunity for another exposure in a different environment. So, we'll utilize the time and the resources that we have as judiciously as possible. But it's been a very productive fall. We have a lot of good information. I think we kind of have an idea of where things sort of stack up once you get the underclassmen to declare, which that'll be kind of middle January-ish. Then you'll kind of have the players that are going to be draft eligible, and then whenever the regular, whenever our football season is over, we'll kind of transition to the next phase of scouting and get ready for the draft.
Well, on Friday, we have a juicy triple header out here for high school football. And will you pop your head out there at some point, Nick, just to have a little look? It's right here in the bowl, and not for scouting, but just to check it out.
Yeah, it might not be bad. I mean, that's the one thing I think about high school is that's pretty cool. Sometimes you're able to see kind of multiple teams, their Super Bowl, whatever, we call it. And we had the same kind of situation. Up in New England, where you literally have games from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, and you just cycle through. So it's a big part of the experience for the kids. I'm sure they have a lot of fun with it playing at NRG. So I don't know if we'll have the mariachi band out for them. We'll see.
Well, you mentioned Massachusetts. They have that Thanksgiving game every year.
Turkey
and
Bowl.
You play your rival on Thanksgiving. So no matter what your season is like, that's your big game. And it's awesome. You can have one win going into that game. And if you win it, that's like winning a bowl game. Sort of.
No doubt. Then you can get a turkey or stuffing, whatever you're going to win.
All right,
at the end
speaking of
the
which, Nick, you knew it was coming.
You segued right into it. I mean,
You knew it was coming.
You knew it was coming.
So, but let's take us back to the Caserio household growing up in Ohio when you used to eat more like a normal. I'm just kidding. When you used to eat Thanksgiving dinner.
Never ate like a normal human being.
I mean, well, what was share with us some traditions, if you will?
Yeah, very, very traditional, I would say. Just, come from a family. We're a small family. My brother, my mom and dad. So it was usually us. And then we typically go to our grandparents, typically my nanny and papa. So we go over there and kind of have sort of a normal Thanksgiving. So that was kind of, our tradition. So, we kind of have our own little tradition now with, my family with, 3 girls, Kathleen and, our dog Lily. So we kind of have our own little sort of Thanksgiving. I mean, it's just us. So it's our day for us to kind of enjoy each other's company. We have a few things they like to do, kind of, do a little where each of us takes somebody we get to pick, and then you get to write about what you're thankful for that
nice.
person.
That's
so
a good idea.
Kind of create our
Great
own
idea.
little, I would say, tradition.
That's great.
So definitely look forward to it, and I'm sure they'll be ready to go.
So the tradition for a lot of families is they turn the TV on and there's football on all day. We live in a football environment all the time. So do you turn the TV off of football, or do you just keep it on?
Yeah, yes and no. A little
Sound
bit of
off.
everything. Not going to have it on all day. So might throw it on there at the end of the day a little bit. But
Triple
we
header.
get enough football during the course
Well,
of the
that's
day.
my point. There's enough
That's
football
like
to
after
go
our
around.
game, I like to go home and just I'm not necessarily watching football. Watch our game to kind of get through it. But, at some point, you need a little break from the television. So.
Nick, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Good luck.
Thanks, fellas.